So, kia ora, welcome to the second part of this presentation on education in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I have here a whakatauki, a Maori proverb, which kind of explains our second part. So, ko te manu e kai ana i te miro, nona te naheri. Ko te manu e kai ana i te maturanga, nona te ao. The bird that eats the berries, their domain is the forest. The bird that eats knowledge, their domain is the world. And so these Māori whakatauki are a way of understanding the world, and particularly the world for New Zealand. There's a really good book that I'll put in the chat as a link, which is linked to, has different whakatauki for each day on a page, and then it kind of unpacks what that means for people. So just a bit about the education system in New Zealand. I'm just going to switch over to presenter view. In New Zealand, we have ECE, early childhood education, which is 0 to 5. It's not compulsory, although it's quite common that students will go to it. And there's a range of different types, including kohanga reo, which is our Maori immersion. And then what happens is when you hit 5, you go to primary school and you start at year 1. Now, this is a really interesting distinction because I believe in the States, the first year is kindergarten. So we would refer to ECE, that 0 to 5 years, as kindy. So not as 1 year, but the time before is early childhood or kindy or kohanga reo. And then primary starts at year 1. So what that means is that a good way to understand the New Zealand education system is a year, you just move back 1 year to get the grade number. So for example, year 5 is grade 4, year 6 is grade 5. That's a helpful way to understand it. So it runs from essentially kindergarten through to grade 7 or year 8. That's our primary school system. We do have an intermediate school system that runs sometimes for 7 and 8 only. So that would be grade 6 and 7 only. So it's meant to be a transition point into high school. Unlike the US, we don't have middle school. So this would be like a junior middle school that runs. But some primaries will go straight from year 1 to 8. And then your secondary runs for 5 years, which is years 9 to 13 or grades 8 to 12. And the final 3 years include our national curriculum, NCA. One interesting change in New Zealand education came in 1989 under what was called the Tomorrow Schools Initiative. And what the Tomorrow Schools Initiative created was independent school boards. And so I think in the States, you're run by the district. We are run independently by the school board, who have autonomy over the staff, finances, and property is a big one. So they work with the Ministry of Education to fund property. What that's led to is a lot of personalized learning and a lot of personalized opportunities for schools, but it also has led to a bit of a hyper-competitive model because the amount of funding that you receive as a school is based on the numbers that you have, partially. And so what this leads to, I personally think, is quite a hyper-competitive model around wanting to get people to come to your school. So you don't have to go to your local school, you can go to a school out of zone. And so how good the school is really matters to parents. Now, how good the school is for, how good the school is dictated often by what's called an ERA report. So the Education Review Office will come in and write a report on the school. That would be the most accurate way to find out, is the school doing the right things by the kids there? However, unfortunately, we also have what's called a decile system. So the decile system was 1 to 10, and schools are ranked decile 1 to 10. And that number is meant to just show the socioeconomic status of the community. So a decile 10 school would have a very high socioeconomic area around it, and a decile 1 school would have a very low socioeconomic area. So Kelston, the school that I am, is a decile 3 school, so it's in a lower socioeconomic area. But unfortunately, people have used that as a shorthand for it being a bad school. So there's a misunderstanding, and so people will say, oh, it's a decile 2 school. I'd much rather send my kid to a decile 8 school. And so what this does is it stigmatizes low decile schools. which means they lose numbers, which means those numbers go to other schools. There's also that autonomy that extends to private schools. So we do have private schools as well, integrated schools that run separately. Now, what kids learn in those schools is what's called the New Zealand curriculum, which came out in around 2006. The New Zealand curriculum has two parts to it, as a front end and a back end. And this is, I think, really crucial to understanding kind of how New Zealand runs, is that we're really concerned with the learner and the way in which they interact values-wise. So there's 5 key components or skills that we want, competencies that we want people to have: thinking, using languages, symbols, and texts, managing self, relating to others, and participating and contributing. I have a story of an American colleague who came from Seattle, and he taught with me, and we were talking, and he was going, "This is really surprising to me that the focus is not on learning the facts that need to happen." Particularly, he said, "It's really interesting being able to discuss political perspectives with my students as opposed to just reciting when Columbus sailed the ocean blue," which I thought was a bit facetious, but his point was made. So the New Zealand curriculum runs across those year levels from primary all the way through to secondary, and it has 8 levels, so 1 through to 8. And at each of those levels, we have achievement objectives. So those achievement objectives are really like 1 or 2 sentences. Particularly in the area I'm in social sciences, it's very vague. So here are 3 of the achievement objectives from, I think, level 5. So we're talking about grade 8, grade 9. So students are to understand how economic decisions impact on people, communities, and nations, understand how ideas and actions of people in the past have a significant impact on lives, and understand how people define and seek human rights. Now, that's very vague, but what I thought I would do for you that would be quite helpful is break down what that looks like in a classroom. So how do I take this vague document that exists? So just to give you a few more examples, this is, I think, the level 1 listening, reading, and viewing for English. So the indicators that a student is doing things is reads text for enjoyment and personal fulfillment, uses processing and some comprehension strategies, is developing the ability to think critically, begins to monitor. Now, all of that is great stuff, but it is also quite unclear what that might look like. So we've got things in here like purpose and audience, ideas, language features, structure. So that is 1/2 of the level 1 page. So English is quite fleshed out. If we take a look at maths, you've got number and algebra at level 3 and then at level 4. So you've got that there. So equations and expressions, number knowledge, number strategies, patterns and relationships. This is social science. So this is all of the level 5 to level 8. So this is like grade 8 through to grade 12. And if you have a look, those are the only things that guide us from the government, from the curriculum, is I've got a whole bunch of learning objectives. And then if I break it down even further in history and geography and social studies, it's even smaller than that. Now, what tends to happen and what plays out is that at level 6, 7, and 8, we also have our national curriculum, which is our NZQA, our NCA, it's our education certificate that allows students to go to university. It's their qualification. And so that tends to dictate more what happens at those higher levels. But at a junior school, I just thought I'd break down. So this is a unit plan that I have here. And in it, I'm trying to hit 3 achievement objectives: understanding the leadership of groups and how it's acquired and exercised, systems of government in New Zealand and how that affects people's lives, and understand how people define human rights. So this is created by me as a head of faculty. So I've designed, this is just literally the front page, or one of the pages that has the achievement criteria. So I'm looking, okay, at level 6, what do I want a kid to be able to do? That's preparing them for our first level of their qualification. At level 5, what do I want them to be able to do? And so through there, I can kind of break it down and say, look, the kids where they need to be. So just for context, at level 4, I would be expecting a kid coming in at grade 8 or year 9 to be able to describe how people attain power within a particular system, say a dictatorship or democracy, and then describe how people's rights are impacted by that power privilege. But other than that, there's no specific context. So I could look at Hitler as a dictatorship. I could look at North Korea. I could look at people's rights impacted by power and privilege in the civil rights movement. It is pretty broad. And so who defines it is not the curriculum or the government, but rather the school. And particularly, even more than that, the head of faculty. So this breaks down like the first few lessons in our unit plan on power and privilege. And so we have some activities like thinking about who would be the most powerful person in the world. What does power mean? Is it authority? Is it influence? I have my kids look at, whether they think Joe Biden is more powerful than Nicki Minaj. And, unpacking, what does power mean? Is it people following you on Instagram? Is it people doing what you tell them to do? Is it military power? Is it position? All those kind of things. So this is defined by me as the head of faculty. Now, I say defined by me because I've tried to make it as integrated as possible with the people that I have. And then I can have it be flexible around what context the teachers wanted to teach. And so previously I had quite broad contexts. Teachers could look at power in the church. They could look at power within cults. They could look at gender privilege. They could look at able-bodyism. There was a real broadness. Now, what I've decided in more recent times is to narrow it down and find that balance of teachers feeling really supported, feeling like they have a lot of resource. They're not having to create a whole bunch of new stuff, but essentially not just being like, yes, you have to do this. So if a teacher comes to me with a cool idea that they want to do, and I think, yeah, this hits the achievement objective, then I'm okay with that. So yeah, it is largely based on the school, which is a bit of a blessing and the curse, but it allows for a lot of authentic learning context. So one really cool school in Auckland, Hodgsonville Point, where my wife was a teacher, they design all their courses for kids across subjects, and they will pull achievement objectives across subjects. So kids could be doing something like physics and football and looking at the physics of football, and it would be ticking off achievement objectives from the health curriculum and also achievement objectives from the science curriculum. So this is one of our recent assessments, was on identity through tattoo, and we looked at different types of tattooing, tatau, this Samoan tattoo or Pacific tattoo, and then we also looked at tamoko, which is Maori tattoo, and then essentially what the students got to do was they got to interview staff members. So they went around to different staff members and they chose a workshop to go to. The staff member would talk about what their tattoos meant, how it defined their identity, and they would look at things like stigma around tattoo and then write a report, which they presented. So again, we've got that flexibility, which allows for a lot of UDL, universal design for learning, but it also means that if this isn't happening, if you don't have someone really, really competent running the space, it can lead to inequity for different students in different schools that say don't have unit plans that are as well defined. It's a real balance. I've taught at a school where I was just handed the PowerPoints as if they were the curriculum. Here's the PowerPoints, go teach it. And I found that really helpful in the sense that it meant very low stress on me. From a well-being perspective, I felt like, oh man, I don't have to like create a whole bunch of new stuff. However, I also found it really boring and really restrictive because as a teacher, I want to be able to come up with interesting contexts and activities. So there's kind of this balance that we're walking at the moment that I think we're trying to figure out. At year 11, we've moved into our school certificate. So we have 3 levels, year 11, 12, and 13. So this would be grade 10, 11, and 12. And in lots of systems, you have what's called norms reference testing, or NRTs, which basically compares students to other students. Now, getting your head around this, I'm not sure in your district or what the context is, but it's quite an interesting distinction. So students are ranked comparative to other students, and that's the grade that they get. And what that means is that 50% of the population are going to fail. because 50% of the population are below average, which in New Zealand, I think we've kind of gone, hey, this isn't right. And actually what we want students to do is be able to hit a standard or a criteria. And so our NCA system, which was developed in 2002, is all about standards. And so it gives everyone the opportunity to succeed and get to level 1, 2, and 3. Now, that doesn't always happen because students don't meet that standard, but there's no reason why I couldn't have 100% of my students walk out passing that course. That would be totally fine. Now, there is still a little bit, annoyingly, particularly with external exams, they still do a little bit of norms reference testing because they compare student work, which they really shouldn't, but they do. So the question is, what does that mean? Well, essentially what students do is a range of different assessments in each subject. So in NCA, they'll come into NCA and they'll take 6 subjects, and each subject will offer 5 or 6 assessments that are worth things called credits. And a student's goal is to accumulate those credits, so to get as many credits as they can. And so, for example, I would teach in history. I have 3 internal assessments. One is around perspectives, one is around historical research, and one is around like an essay, understanding causes and consequences. So I teach all 3 of those. I teach them over 3 terms, do a little bit of teaching, and then they have about 3 weeks to do the assessment. And at the end of the assessment, they get a grade and they get credits. So the assessment they're doing at the moment is worth 5 credits. Yeah. And so their aim is to get at the end of the year at level 2 or at grade 11 is to get 60 credits. If they get 60 credits, they've passed their level 2. So if they get their 60 credits, so my subject offers, I think, 23. So if you consider they've got 6 subjects, all offering a range of different numbers of credits. Some offer, 23, some offer 17, some offer, they should have enough. Most students are often taking about 120 credits or 100 credits. So if you consider 60 is the number, it's almost like 50%. They need to pass 50% of their assessments. You also have external credits. So the internal credits are the ones that I mark. So I just mentioned those 3 there. There's also 2 external credits, which are exams. And so those exams are marked by national moderators, and they get marked by someone else. And often they happen at the end of the year. So externals aren't always exams, and things like art, they're a portfolio board that gets sent away. But essentially, yeah, it's usually a bit of a split. Now, the joy of that is it's a bit of a pick and choose. So in history, there are, I think, I want to say 8 to 9 standards that you can choose. And you don't have to choose external standards. So you can design a course for a kid that's purely internal. So you could say, we're going to offer 5 standards in the subject. All of them are internally assessed over time. So if you hate exams, you don't have to do exams. So what people do is they may design a course like that. You could also offer a course that was purely exam heavy if you wanted to. You could say, I'm going to offer you 1 internal, and then you're going to do all 3 externals at the end of the year. So that flexibility is quite interesting. You can also mix standards across subjects. So the idea or the beauty of it is, again, you could create courses that blended, say, like media studies standards and art history standards, and create your own courses. Now, whilst that is proposed, it's very rarely practiced. I think I could name maybe 5 or 6 schools in New Zealand that are doing cross-curricular work at NCA level. So what a student gets is when they get those credits, they also get a grade. And so you'll see here, this is an example of the standard. So this is the level 2 standard on perspectives. So interpret different perspectives of a historical event that's of significance to New Zealand, interpret in depth, and then comprehensively interpret. And so the standard exists online. You can find all of these online that unpacks what's comprehensive mean, what does in depth mean. And I mark based on what I believe the standard, whether they're meeting that standard, and then I send it to a moderator. So this is called internal moderation. So I get 5 or 6 of my pieces and I give them to another teacher. It can be at my school or it can be at another school, and they mark them and confirm. And if I had 4 of them they disagreed with me, I would go back and remark. That allows some consistency. There's also a thing called external moderation, where I have to send away 6 copies of 6 copies of a standard that they choose, and I send that away and they give me a grade back. And if I come back inconsistent, I have to do a bunch of work to make sure that the teaching that I'm doing is consistent. So the standard is quite different from the task, and I'll get to that in a second. But essentially, a kid could get achieved, merit, and excellence. So forget about percentages, forget about that kind of specific a grade. They can get 3 grades, or say they can get 4 grades: not achieved, achieved, merit, and excellence. And excellence is that top level. So in terms of university, it plays out that you want to be getting as many excellences as you can. If they get 50 credits at excellence level, they get what's called an excellence certificate endorsement. It's all quite different and quite complex, but essentially you're gathering as many credits as you can, and you've got to get 60 in that year level to pass. That's the standard. The task may be designed by me. So it has to be checked, and they have preset tasks on a website called TKI that I could download and use, or I can design my own. So for example, this one here, I've done the year 11 standard using Little Rock 9 as the case study for this. So they have to write from the perspective of Governor Forbes, and then they can write from the perspective of Eisenhower. They can write from the perspective of a member of the Little Rock 9. At level 2, I'm currently doing the Arab-Israeli conflict. And so they're looking at the 6-Day War, and they have to write from 2 different perspectives on the 6-Day War. So they can essentially pick and choose. At level 3, they've done historical perspectives on different events in New Zealand. We're currently undergoing a refresh of NCA, and I'm part of this program. So it is a pilot program. We're in our 2nd year, and it's going to come into full force next year. And what that does is currently standards are worth a different number of credits. So some standards are worth 2, like the standards in maths that are worth 2 credits. There are some standards worth 6, some standards are worth 3. And they're trying to streamline it all so that in every subject, there will be 4 standards only. 2 internal, 2 external. So 4 standards, 2 internal, 2 external, which is great for me because it means I get to mark less. And the 2 external are marked by someone else. And every standard will be worth 5 credits. So every subject will have 20 credits on offer, 50% of which are marked by a national moderator, 50% that are marked by me. So this is one of the new standards. I teach grade 10 social studies, and they have to describe a social action that they've taken. And so the social action that we've taken, the task that I've created is the students have to create a pātaka kai, which is a food cupboard. So like a food pantry, the food pantry movement, they have to design it, they have to market it, they have to build it, they have to put it near school, and then they have to go into an exam and bring evidence of all the things they've done and discuss how it supported or challenged a system. So on top of that, we've also got our new Aotearoa New Zealand Histories curriculum, which really, I'm not going to go too much into detail, but it really unpacks New Zealand history in depth, which has to be taught at grade 7 and 8. One of the things I have as a real regret is I never learned New Zealand history when I was at school. So unlike America, who I think do quite well to teach you American history, the histories that I learned when I was at school were around European history, imperialism, totalitarianism. I never learned New Zealand history, and part of that was because I did what's called the Cambridge pathway, the British pathway. So schools could offer that. So they can offer NCA or they can offer Cambridge exams, or they can offer IB, International Baccalaureate. Most schools offer NCA, particularly public schools. There are still some private schools in New Zealand that offer IB and Cambridge because they see it as a better system. But again, heavily exam-based, and I didn't ever get an opportunity until I hit university to learn anything about New Zealand history. So we talked about the Native Schools Act and sort of how language was taken away. We have a long tail of underachievement, particularly for our Maori and Pacifica students. New Zealand gets harked as being one of the most innovative countries in the world, and I'm excited that you're coming to here to see that innovation. But I can't not be honest that we also have issues we're facing that I'm sure exist in terms of culturally responsive practice in the United States as well. So the underachievement issue for Maori students is not a Maori problem, it's a New Zealand problem. And just in terms of school leavers, so 74% of Maori students will leave school with their NCA level 2. So that's the year before their final year of school. They don't have to stay till their final year, they can go out and work with their NCA level 2. That's compared to 87.6 for European students. So about 10% more students who are European gain that qualification. In 2018, 42% of Maori aged between 25 and 34 had a bachelor's degree or above, and that's compared to 63% of the total population in that age group. So that's tertiary education stats. The last thing is that, and this is the big one, is that in 2019, they reported the ministry that 50% of all students stood down. So stood down for behavioral issues, suspended, was 59% of students suspended were Maori. And that's despite representing only about 24% of the school population. So we've got a real issue in that space. And some of that comes from a cultural bias, things like deficit theorizing. In 2001, Professors Russell Bishop and Mary Berryman from the University of Waikato, they underwent research looking at those educational disparities and looked to change this by altering the classroom strategies and teaching strategies for Māori students. Their aim was to create culturally responsive classrooms. This led to a program called Te Kotahitanga that was in schools for a long time, but you know, things that are good get defunded by the government, as you well know. And so that's shifted into a range of different projects that both Russell Bishop and Mary Berryman run in terms of culturally responsive practice. The main thing was they would use evidence-based research, look at professional development, observation and feedback, and have co-construction meetings. My understanding is that it largely based on the skill of the teacher as opposed to longer term change. So here we have a phrase that is what works for Māori works for all. Some of these things, I'm sure you're all great educators, and so we'll know some of these things. Collaborative work, high expectations, being culturally responsive. And I think it's really important to articulate, there's a lot of talk that I see online about culturally relevant teaching, like having culturally relevant topics and having stuff on your walls that's culturally relevant. I think that's a baseline in Aotearoa. I think what we need to be doing is shifting the way we teach, the how we teach. And so there's this word called ako, which is teaching and learning. So shared teaching and learning. So I will often come into class and have the students teach me things regularly about their worldview and things I don't know. We also have a thing called tuakana taina, which is like a brotherhood model. So tuakana is like an older brother, taina is like a younger brother. And so it's like an older brother, younger brother learning from one another model. We're also undergoing a conversation in New Zealand around maturanga Māori, which is Māori knowledge, which is being incorporated into our new curriculum. It encompasses some of the philosophy and cultural practices, environmental knowledges, systems of learning. We had a lot of flooding in our country recently, and it was Māori who knew that the flooding was coming because they knew the signs in the nature around what was happening with some of the trees. This is contentious, like real contentious at the moment, particularly among science teachers and the university, who argue that maturanga Māori doesn't have a place in physics and in that higher level science and maths. So that's an interesting dynamic at the moment. We're also well known for our kind of holistic approach to education. So looking at well-being, and we use a model called Te Whare Tapawha, which is this house. A whare is a house, and it holds up the different parts of who we are. And so there are 5 aspects: your tinana, your physical well-being; your wairua, your spiritual well-being; your hirinaro, which is your mental and emotional well-being; and your whānau, your family and social. And the last one that was added recently was your whenua, your connection to the land or to the roots. And so when one of those poles holding the house is not okay, then your well-being suffers. So this is a model made by a Maori academic called Sir Mason Jury, and he coined this, and you'll see it a lot in our physical well-being education. We also have connection to, like, so I run a whānau class, which is a group of 16 students that I look after personally as a teacher. It's an expectation. I see them every day in the morning. I check their attendance. I keep an eye on them. I ask them how they're doing. I often will be on the phone to family to just check in and see how they're going. So you find that quite common. A little bit about me. I work at Kelston Boys. It's a traditional boys' school that's doing some pretty interesting and innovative stuff. Again, low decile, largely Maori and Pacifica. So Pacific communities probably make up about 80% of our learners. Maori make up probably about 15%, and the other 5% are European and other. So I think I teach maybe 3 white students in my whole classroom practice. And so some of the things that I've looked at is mahinatahi, which is power sharing in the classroom. So I've done some research into getting students to design and co-create lessons and teach us using a framework. Teaching through real world learning contexts. So things like the identity through tattoo unit, things like going on trips and engaging in the world outside. And the last thing that I'm doing is I work with a group that is out of that research in Te Kotahitanga. It developed into a group called Potama Pounamu, who work out of the University of Waikato, and we do culturally responsive observation. So a lot of the work that I do teach, but a lot of the work that I do is going into classrooms, recording what I see, and then having debrief conversations and growth conversations with learners, teacher learners, to figure out, and specifically with a focus on Maori. So I interview the students and I ask them what they're enjoying, what's working, what's not working. And that's kind of really my mahi. The last thing I want to leave you with is a whakatauki. He waka eke noa, a canoe we are all in with no exception. Sometimes this is translated to being, we're all in this together. It's not quite High School Musical, but you've got the gist. So he waka eke noa, the journey we're on in Aotearoa is to all be working together. So if you have any questions, I'll just put my contact details up. I write a blog if you want to go visit that. But other than that, I'm more than happy to take questions about our system. I know I'm running to time. Unless there's any other questions, we'll just end in the karakia, because that's the way you start and end. So the tikanga is that you end with the karakia. So it doesn't want to go, there we go. Ona hea te pō whiri marama, tomakia te ao whatu tangata, tātai ki runga, tātai ki raro, tātai ahoro, homie, hue, tai hie. Mauri ora. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
I love that so much. It's such a way to start and end. And I think, Kit, this highlights, and maybe this is, you were going to say some beautiful words and too, but it really highlights the richness that we all regard, like disregarding where we come from and you know what our cultural backgrounds are, but there's so much richness that we can get and share and really benefit from when we are, you know, when we respect all the cultures. So yeah, it's just beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm so excited that you guys get the opportunity to come to our beautiful country, and I hope you have an amazing time.